What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the 5 games I have enjoyed the most so far in 2024, which, to give a little context to, thus far, I have reviewed about 25 games this year, though that does include a few older releases as well, and for the sake of this video, I'll be sticking to the things that actually released in 2024, at least on PC, which is a video I like to make to kind of talk about how this year in games is going thus far. As for me at least, I tend to divide the year up into all of the games that release in the first half, that is to say before the big announcement shows that take place in the first week of June, that have effectively replaced E3 at this point since that's been cancelled permanently, especially since all of those shows should be giving us release dates for everything this year that has yet to be assigned one, even though it should be coming out this year, such as Bloodlines 2 or Avowed. But focusing purely on the here and now, let's actually dive into this and start talking about the games I've enjoyed the most thus far. Kicking it off with another Crab's Treasure. A sort of bizarre take on a Souls-like that puts us in the role of a hermit crab, in what is mostly kind of a parody of the genre to be sure, but also, it is actually pretty good at what it is imitating. Especially when you get into all the mechanics that specifically revolve around the fact that you're a crab, like for instance, armor-wise, you pick up shells, each shell can have its own ability that you can activate, you get special sort of magical abilities you can use as well, and that's to say nothing of the parrying system that is a bit unique, as blocking in this game involves you going inside your shell, and releasing that at the right moment amounts to a parry, and mastering all those systems is as fun as it ever is if you like that genre, but in particular the game allows for a customizable difficulty setting, which hilariously includes the ability to simply pull out a gun and kill anything in a single hit, including bosses you've been struggling with, which makes for just a hilarious game, and that's to say nothing of the well-crafted levels and all the little details that go into it. And everything I just mentioned would have been good enough on its own, and yet somehow they also managed to stick in a surprisingly moving story that actually made me feel something at the end. So all in all, another Crab's Treasure is genuinely a gem of a game, and I had a ton of fun with it. But that's not the only good time I've had this year, as another title that has been a lot of fun was Pacific Drive. Releasing pretty early in the year, in February actually, I only took a quick look at it then, and then I had meant to get around to it for so long because I enjoyed that time I played with it, that a few months later, I doubled back and managed to actually review the thing. But what is it? So Pacific Drive puts us in the role of a sort of investigative journalist that is passing through the Olympic exclusion zone, as they call it, which is home to a whole bunch of anomalies that actually pull you into the area before what is called a remnant, a car in this case, saves you, but eventually you're going to become so obsessed with the thing that it takes over your life until you die. In order to fix that, you need to dive further and further into the zone, using your supernatural car to navigate and protect you from the anomalies of the zone. And that turns the story into this bizarre supernatural adventure, explaining what this place is, how it came to be this way, the scientists involved. But the real highlight is the actual gameplay itself, because Pacific Drive is actually a roguelike where we're going to be dodging anomalies, collecting resources, upgrading our base and thus our car, customizing pretty much every aspect of it. And there's a whole host of difficulty options to make that easier or more difficult for yourself, which I'd say is important because there are a whole host of mechanics this game has on offer that are a little hard to quantify in a short video like this, but what I will say is that as someone who has reviewed hundreds of games and played many more, I'm sure I really remember the games that stick out to me as unique, and Pacific Drive was one such game. Its exact combination of all these individual elements comes together to make something that I can honestly say I've never quite experienced before, which made for a very fun time. Moving right along to number 3, though, we then have Geneforge 2. Obviously, the second title in the Geneforge series, but more specifically, this was a remake of a 2000s CRPG from Spiderweb Software that was brought forward and sort of modernized with mechanics that frankly make it easier to play these days. But the reason that is a thing is that Geneforge was a bit of a cult classic, as it is a series with a really compelling premise, which is that there are wizards who have the ability to shape life, and they control basically everything about the world thanks to their power. and it is, as you would imagine, a sort of secretive organization that rules with an iron fist where necessary, especially when it comes to their creations. And their creations get especially complicated when they start making humanoid ones that have a modicum of intelligence, which raises a plethora of moral and ethical dilemmas that you have to find your way through. And Geneforge 2 really nailed that. There is a Shaper colony that has gone unresponsive. You're sent to investigate as you are an apprentice with a master. But the situation turns out to be a bit more than was initially thought, as the entire place has devolved into several factions fighting over power, including creations that have learned how to shape life themselves, effectively usurping the Shaper's power by learning how to use it. And the back and forth between all those factions and your choices involved in who you help or who you harm, who you want to stay loyal to, or switch allegiances. Do you want to be a Shaper? Do you want to help out these creations in one form or another? That's all up to you. You can even wash your hands of the whole situation. And I will say that gameplay-wise, sure, Geneforge 2 is probably nothing to write home about. I've played many a CRPG. There are plenty that certainly play better than this game. But what I loved about this one in particular, and what really stuck out to me, was just the story of it. I was engrossed by the story of this game, and I could not put it down until I had finished it and gotten all the way through it. Now, combine that with the fact that I just love CRPGs generally, and it's probably no surprise that it's on this list. So while they certainly might be a little bit old, if you haven't checked the 2 Geneforge remakes out just yet, you should definitely do so. I believe they actually have plans to further remaster the 3rd, 4th, and 5th entries in the series as well. Fourth up, however, we have Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, an action-adventure set in colonial America where we play as a banisher, someone who banishes ghosts that refuse to move on from the world, attaching themselves to people and slowly draining their life force. Our job is basically to get to the bottom of those hauntings to banish the ghosts at the heart of them, which involves investigations, as you might imagine, getting to the heart of these complicated, messy things that have led to the ghosts being there to begin with, and then passing judgment on what to do about it, which is honestly compelling in and of itself. But then there's another element to the game of the actual action portion where you have to fight off these enemies, and even that part is surprisingly competent as well. So overall, this amounted to a really compelling story that I enjoyed a lot, an interesting premise, great characters, and some decently fun gameplay and combat to go along with it, all made for a game that I enjoyed a great deal, which was a pretty nice way to kick off the early part of the year, as this launched very early in February. And they even have a demo available over on Steam if you'd like to check it out for yourself. But it was a tremendous AA title. But that does bring us to our final entry on this list, which just so happens to be Ghost of Tsushima, which, while technically released a few years ago, yes, it only came to PC this year, which is the first time I had played it, so I'm gonna count it. Another game that I really loved the story of. I was very moved by it. The ending, while I definitely saw it coming about halfway through, in spite of knowing it was coming, still managed to hit exactly the right notes and was a really moving scene. But it's a story about what honor means and how that can be interpreted in different ways, especially when it comes down to your own personal sense of honor versus a collective set of ideals, and how those manage to hold up in the face of an all-out war against an invading force, which mirrors the very real Mongol invasion of Japan, and they did such a great job with it. And then you have the actual world itself, which is beautiful first and foremost, but also does a lot of really interesting things to mask, I would say, a little more tired mechanics. So gameplay-wise, this is an open-world action-adventure that utilizes very tried-and-true methods, and while if you 100% the game can get a little repetitive, it does a few unique things in that regard, such as the direction of the wind pushing you where you need to go, and other environmental tells that point you in the direction of those points of interest without you actually having to pull up a map or simply follow a marker, which is a great way to get you involved in the world and out of a menu. And then there's the actual combat, which, to my mind at least, was really engaging, especially when you bumped it up to the higher difficulties where you can die in a couple hits, but so can the enemy, which can make for some really intense encounters when you're tearing your way through Mongol camps guerrilla warfare style, and I really enjoyed mastering that combat system alongside all the game's other mechanics. So This is probably the open world game I have enjoyed the most in several years because of how well it did all the things it was trying to do, even if none of them were particularly unique, let's say. They did nonetheless very successfully put a fresh coat of paint on them that I enjoyed a fair bit, which is obviously what it's doing on this list. But that is pretty much where we're going to wrap up. Those have been the releases in the first half of 2024 that I have enjoyed the most, though I certainly have reviewed quite a few more than that. And from here, we're just going to have to see how the rest of the year happens to pan out. So towards the end of the year, I will actually, as always, be ranking every game I've reviewed this year, which is mostly just for fun because there's so many different genres and things involved that it really is just which ones I enjoyed playing the most. But I still enjoyed doing it, and given that the back half of the year should contain quite a few titles that I personally have been looking forward to, such as Avowed or Bloodlines 2, again, it should make for a pretty good time. But in the meantime, I would love to know what video games released in the first half of 2024 that you enjoyed the most, as there are quite a few I simply have not played. I imagine some people enjoyed Helldivers 2 as an example, but multiplayer stuff doesn't tend to be my jam, and if it's not on PC, I certainly haven't played it. And as a result, I would love to hear about those games that I have not played that other people enjoyed a great deal. In any event, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.